The Jazz blew a 20-point lead again in an overtime loss, but learn draft history and meet the draft class that could change the Jazz's fortunes for years to come. All ahead on Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Jazz. My name's Leif Thulin. I'm excited and honored to have the opportunity to fill in for David Locke on Locked On Jazz. As many of you guys may know by now, I'm a lifelong Jazz fan who's credentialed NBA draft analyst for Locked On NBA Big Board, attendee of the 2023 and 2024 NBA Draft Combine, Jazz broadcast assistant and statistician, lover of college basketball, so don't expect all the geeky numbers of usual to be gone, but I'll bring a unique perspective as a diehard college hoops fan, NBA draft analyst, as well as a Jazz employee who goes to all the games to make you as knowledgeable as possible about your Jazz, both about today's game and about the players that could be in Jazz uniforms for years to come. Thanks for making Locked On Jazz your first listen each and every day. And remember, Locked On Jazz is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On Jazz, where the best way to help us grow is comment anything below. And today's question is, which player on the Utah Jazz's roster right now is the most likely to become an all-star? I have an answer, but I don't know if it's going to be what you guys think. I'll try to engage with you on that. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So head on over to FanDuel and start playing. By the way, your favorite podcast now has a newsletter, and introducing the Locked On Jazz daily newsletter. One stop for your ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free right now at lockedondaily.com. I signed up a while ago. It's really a lovely thing. If you can't catch the full episode, which we hope you do, you can always get debriefed about the latest about the team you love. That's lockedondaily.com, and start your day with the all-new free Locked On Jazz newsletter. Today in the first segment, I'll break down what went down into last night's game, or as I'm recording this, the last night game as in hours ago, the Jazz and Clippers, where the Jazz started off wonderfully and ended not so well. In the second segment, I'll go through the history of evidence that suggests the Jazz are threading a precariously placed needle and why it's so important to get a top 3 pick. And in the final segment, I'll briefly touch on the line of delineation where I believe this draft falls off in terms of certainty of getting a dude. And what I mean by a dude, a star. Let's dive right in. The Jazz and Clippers played a weird one. The Kessler was out for the Jazz, so that's monumental, and Kawhi Leonard was out for the Clippers. Where the Jazz made inroads was they shot the ball sensationally. They made everything in the first quarter, making a season-high 9 threes in the opening period, and that was 9 of 14. They were not bashful, but they weren't shooting crazy shots. They made a ton, and they made 18 in the game. So they started 9 of 14, and for those of you who don't love math, that's 9 of 27 the rest of the way, and that includes 3 more quarters and overtime. The Jazz, in that period, and then early in the second quarter, opened up a 20-point lead, largely because of their prolific shooting, and the Clippers really struggled. But it ain't over till the fat lady sings. James Harden and Norm Powell combined for 73. That's what all-star guards do, and they're veteran all-star guards. They know how to win, and they played a youthful Jazz team. But the weirdest part of this was no one scored for the final 2 minutes and 50 seconds as it went to overtime. Defensive stops, sure, but turnovers, it was weird from both sides. It wasn't just the Jazz's inexperience. They were scoring. The Clippers were to come back in this game, but it went to overtime in kind of a whimper as opposed to a dramatic ending. So let's now examine some stats that played a large factor in this game. And we talked about a few of these and in previewing this. And if you listen or watch the game, I'm sure they talked about them on the broadcast because there are big indicators between these two teams. So let's start with the Jazz having a great first period. They do that often. The Jazz have been starting fast recently. The Jazz have been leading or have been tied after the first quarter in 8 of their last 9 games. They've held a 10-point lead in the first quarter in 7 of the last 9 games, and they've held a 10-point lead in 8 of the 9 first halves. So the Jazz have been getting out of the racetracks quickly, and then it depends how they finish the game because they finished the game great against the Warriors. They made a crazy surge against the Suns only to have that one spoiled. They made a crazy push against the Lakers at the start of the second half, but there have been some warts in there too. So after one in this one, the Jazz led by 7. So check mark there, and the shooting barrage certainly helped. But the Jazz certainly did have a lot of live ball turnovers. That's something that's plagued them. Early, the Clippers were anemic offensively, which also helped the Jazz to the tune of starting 9 of 30, while the Jazz started 14 of 21. But what you will notice there is the Clippers had more shots. And that leads me to my next point, where I talk about turnovers and paint points. We talked about this in the preview of both. After reviewing the Lakers game, we talked about that as being a positive. The Jazz had fewer turnovers than the Lakers, which is very rare for the Jazz. That was not the case today against the Clippers. The Clippers are also very good in the paint. So here's some stats entering this game. The Clippers averaged 62 points per game in the paint over 3 games against Utah entering this one, including 78 that they scored on Saturday, 5 days prior. The Clippers have shot better than 62% in the paint in those games against the Jazz, and the Jazz have shot not very well in those games. But it helps if you're the Clippers when the Jazz hand you the ball, especially when the Clippers are already staunch defensively, so they don't need any free baskets because they're not giving you any. So for reference, the Clippers are the second best in defensive rating in the NBA, giving you 108.3 points per 100 possessions, and the Clippers force a lot of turnovers. So that proved true in this one. So they force a lot of turnovers. In fact, entering these 3 games, the Jazz had at least 19 turnovers in all 3 games against the Clippers. The Jazz had 21 in their last one. You thought maybe they can minimize it, but today was no different. The Jazz had 26 turnovers, leading to only 20 transition points off of turnovers. So that's pretty strange that to say only when you're giving up 20 points off of turnovers, but it could have been a lot worse. So I say all that to say this. Largely, the game went to script outside of the Jazz shooting amazingly, but then regression into the mean hit, and Norm Powell and James Harden combined for over 70. And that was enough to get it done, as the Jazz at the end of the game couldn't figure out ways to score in a steady way. And I think part of that has to do with a lot of new players playing new roles. I mean, Kyle Filipowski was sensational. He had a career high 20, but he was the starting center, and he held Ivica Zubac, who's been really good against the Jazz, to minimal production, shooting poorly from the field, and he's been extremely productive. Regardless of the loss, the Jazz blew a 20-point lead. They lead the NBA in 20-point leads blown. It's not great, but you have to be happy with the play, especially in the half court defensively without Walker Kessler, who's the best Jazz defender. And you got to be happy with the egalitarian attack, especially with the ability to create open threes. The Jazz cashed in on those in the early stage and hit 18. They had 8 different players hit threes, and they created great looks all game. They were not troubled by the staunch defense except for turning the ball over. When they were able to maintain possession, they got great shots. Will Hardy, I talked about this yesterday, that I go to these press conferences and I love to hear what Will Hardy's opening remark is. He opened his press conference by saying he was thrilled with the heart and the effort that the Jazz played with, but they were numerically at a disadvantage in this game, with the Clippers shooting 20 more field goals, 10 more free throw attempts, and the Jazz committed 26 turnovers, and 16 of those were live ball. But you can't complain because he was delighted by the effort. That's how he opened it. Yeah, he was disappointed that they lost a game that he feels like they should have won. He's disappointed that his guys played so hard without a key contributor and still had the chance to win against a very good Los Angeles Clippers team. That's all fair, but he's remained proud despite what I would say was a slog in the fourth quarter and overtime. The Jazz had 6 score in double figures and did so without a key cog in Kessler, who opens many driving lanes for drivers like Isaiah Collier, as well as the space for shooters with his vertical spacing, and they still got great shots. And part of that's Filipowski stretching the floor and making Zubac uncomfortable. But you still like to have Walker Kessler. It makes me even more excited that the youngsters were able to find a way to coalesce on the fly. 3 big takeaways I had that are positives despite a loss in which you blew a 20-point lead. Filipowski had a career high of 20 along with 10 boards to pace the Jazz. For reference, Lowry also had 20, and he shot 50% from the field. He's been on and off, and he's been adapting to a new offensive philosophy that caters more to the guards and helps the players along that need to be helped along in order for the Jazz to be better when the Jazz have a chance. And that will help Lowry in the long run, but it doesn't necessarily bode well for him in the short run. Will Hardy talked about that in his opening press conference before the game, and he said Lowry's been the consummate teammate, the epitome of unselfish. And there's so many people that say, I'm all about the team. Lowry Markkanen embodies it. Second takeaway, Collier had a bad game against a great defense in terms of his ability to take care of the ball and was still a positive on the court. He scored 16 points, dished out 8 assists, and added 4 steals. And I think most impressively, he knocked down those 2 free throws at the clutch moments. And he showed he's here for a long time and he means business, knocking down the big free throws. And even in a bad game, still found a way to have an impact that was positive. Last positive point, the Jazz generated a ton of great looks and got experience playing a close game with a supremely youthful group. And if you're getting worried about flying too close to the sun, and like I mentioned in the previous episode, and winning too much, as we discussed, we will discuss where the stars, where the stars are drafted, and then who are the stars in this draft next. So fret not. And the Jazz, this is as good of a loss as you can suffer if you're one of the people who says we must lose, but we got to internally develop. Well, there's internal development, and it is a loss in the loss column. Coming up next, we'll talk about the history that strongly suggests the Jazz need to be within the top 3 to ignite the rebuild. But first, a brief word from DoorDash. NBA fans, get ready. They swoosh, you save, thanks to Dash Pass. Every time a player drops 50 or more points in an NBA game, you can score a huge deal the next day. It's simple. When any player scores 50 or more in a game during the 2024-2025 NBA regular season, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order, up to $10 off the next day from noon to midnight. Here are a few ways you can take advantage of this deal. And you can get creative, but here are a few. Planning on having a game day feast? After an epic 50-point performance, celebrate by ordering wings, pizza, or burgers from your favorite spot delivered straight to your door. Or how about lunch on the go? Need a quick and easy lunch the next day when you're at work? With Dash Pass, you can get your favorite meals with 0 delivery fees and reduced service fees. Plus, you can now save even more with this exclusive offer. Sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save. With any player scores 50 or more in a game, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order the next day, up to $10 off. So just use promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating merchants. You got to have a Dash Pass account. Terms do apply. So visit DoorDash to learn much, much more. And I also want to tell you about Murdoch Hyundai. Murdochs have been in Utah for over 80 years. Hyundai's the best car for your money, the best bang for your buck. It's got safety features, bells, whistles, and all of their amazing cars for amazing prices. The SUV lineup features the Kona, the Tucson, the Santa Fe, the Palisade. And right now I'm in the Tucson and I'm loving it. I'm driving home and it's got the display. It's got my music. It gives you the display. And then when you change lanes, it gives you a perfect crystal clear image of the lane that you're changing into. It's got all the bells and whistles. And they also have electric cars. The Ioniq 5 was named the Electric Motor Trend SUV of the Year by Motor Trend. The Ioniq 6, even better. It's electric, looks just like a Porsche, and won the World Car of the Year. And there are 3 locations in Linden, Murray, and Logan. And I can personally vouch for how wonderful the people are in Murray. And one of these guys listens to Locked On Jazz and has told me so. So hello to you. And thank you guys for hooking me up with a beautiful car right now. And I highly recommend you check out Murdoch Hyundai. All righty, welcome back to Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin. So the Jazz, as we stand after this latest game, are in the 3rd spot in terms of the tanking race. And many of you have chalked this whole season into where we land. And it may not be all dependent on May 12th or whatever it is this year, but a lot of it does depend on that. So for those of you who are statistically inclined, that has the Jazz with a 52% chance of landing within the top 4, and that's the 3rd worst odds, with around a 14% chance of picking 1st overall. For reference, 4th has you at 48, so slightly less than half of a chance, right? So I had some fun. I spun 4 times on Tankathon right before this episode, and the Jazz landed at 5th, 1st, 2nd, and 5th. The 52% only worked 2 times in this case. Not terribly surprising. It's already not a guarantee to be there, but it should. But should the Jazz fall out of the bottom 4, it gets scary, and that's what these numbers I'm about to present to you will convey. Should the Jazz win too much, and should they have won this one, they would have been in 4th, and they would have had 2%, or I guess 4% less of a chance than what they have already. And yes, it's a guessing game. As Gordy Chiesa calls it, the lottery gods. And you got to get lucky, but you got to put yourself in the position to get fortunate. So it's already not a guarantee. But for reference, the third best chances to pick first the last 4 years have landed on the Hornets. This past year, getting 6. They took Tijon Salam. The year before that, it was the Spurs. They got Victor Wembanyama. So there we go. Pistons, 5th overall. Magic, 5th overall. So 3 of the last 4 that have been the third worst team in the NBA have gotten picks outside the top 4. That doesn't look too promising, but it's not all disastrous. It's just an illustration that the top 3 does not always yield what the results that landing within the top 3 should. And people be like, then why tank? Well, here's why. We're going to look at the last 5 years and explore who has been great and who hasn't, and how it directly relates to draft slot. The obvious thing is the first pick would be the best chance to become an all-star, right? At some point in their career, a first pick has a 63% chance of being an all-star according to the last 30 years. So the first pick, 63%. Strangely, the third pick has yielded more all-stars than the second. They've had 17 of 30. That's 56%, 57 if you round up. The second pick has yielded 12 out of 30. That's 40%. So the top 3 yields you at least a 40% chance of being an all-star, and higher if you're first or third for some reason. Other than the top 3 picks, there were 2 other spots which had double-digit number of players selected as all-stars the last 30 years. That's the 4th pick, unsurprisingly, and strangely, the 9th pick with 10 all-stars each. That's a probability of landing an all-star of 33%. I don't think that is a very sustainable way to draft an all-star at 9. I think that's a lot of luck involved and some shrewd selections. So essentially, the top 4 picks yield at least a 33% chance of this player being an all-star, and that's where you need to land. Like, that's the conclusion, clear as day. That's where you need to land, and that's why becoming a top 3 pick, a top 4 pick, you need to be one of the worst teams in basketball. And this internal development and losing a game where you led by 20, it hurts, but it may be for the best. And I'm telling you that the Jazz players did not like losing this game. The competitiveness displayed and the frustration demonstrated as walking off the court was not intentional. But if Jazz fans, probably many of you are happy, and you've got to be thrilled about the internal development too. So that's where you need to land. For reference, just because I like stats, the 5th pick yields 30% chance. So that's pretty good. The 6th pick yields a 20% chance. The 7th, a 10% chance. The 8th, a 3% chance. The 9th, weirdly, 33% chance. And the 10th, 26%. So 9 and 10, probably outliers. But look at 6, 7, and 8. It descends. The chances really descend. Though fairly high, and or at least higher than I thought they would be for each slot, the percentage does drop drastically as you fall out of that top 4. So let's see what the caliber of all-star these guys are too, because I've said it the past 3 years when I've been on this podcast and when I'm on Locked On NBA Big Board, that in the rebuild after trading a guy like Donovan and Rudy in the case of the Jazz, you need to build a team better than what they were to justify that trade. And I know there's reasons you got to do it, and you got to listen to what's happening, but you got to make a team that's better than what you already had, and that means finding a star and a franchise-altering talent. My philosophy has been, will be, and always will be drafting toward getting a star. And the recent years, they've been friendly to drafting towards ceilings. You know, you got a crazy ceiling in Victor Wembanyama, who, of course, has a high floor. And you've had a guy like Amin Thompson, who was unknown, but he had tremendous talent, and he looks like he's going to be a star for years to come. Plenty more examples. But they haven't been overly friendly to the Jazz, and that's largely self-imposed by overachieving. The Jazz have probably been too good under Will Hardy and ended up sitting in mediocrity in terms of basketball, or in basketball purgatory, as I like to call it, picking 9th and 10th the last 2 years. This year, I believe there is a clear direction, and that's wonderful because they've lacked it in years past, and that could lend toward the Jazz finding their star that can alter the course of franchise history and take us deep into the playoffs. I mean, deep into the playoffs is hard to do, as we saw, because we had a really good team and yet only won one playoff series in a row. We never won 2 playoff series in a row. So the first picks the last 5 years: Zachary Risache, Victor Wembanyama, Paolo Banchero, Cade Cunningham, Anthony Edwards. That's 4 All-Stars and 4 All-NBA guys by my estimation by the end of their careers, much less probably just in a couple years, if not this year. Second pick, Sarr, Miller, Holmgren, Jalen Green, Wiseman. That's one all-star and two maybes. The all-star is Holmgren, in my opinion. He's yet to be one, but he's a game-changing talent, and he's just been injured. And unfortunately, is in the Western Conference that possesses Jokic, Şengün, Sabonis, and Victor Wembanyama. And he's been injured, but he's an all-star talent. Brandon Miller's a maybe. Jalen Green's a maybe. I don't see it with Sarr, and certainly Wiseman's day has passed. Third pick, Shepherd, Scoot Henderson, Jabari Smith, Evan Mobley, LaMelo Ball. That's two all-stars in Mobley and LaMelo Ball. I think there's a chance for Scoot. Reed Shepherd had a great game in the G League, but, I'm not overly thrilled there. Fourth pick, Stephon Castle, Amen Thompson, Keegan Murray, Scotty Barnes, Patrick Williams. There's one all-star that's already happened in Scotty Barnes, and I could see the two most recent, meaning Castle and Amen Thompson, both being all-stars as well. Very high on both of those, and I was very high on both those guys because of their high ceilings. Castle's my number one this past year. Now the 5 pick, Ron Holland, Osar Thompson, Jaden Ivey. Those are all Pistons, and it's showing that not all tanks work perfectly, as the lottery odds do matter, and this shows the variability in 5th picks and how difficult it is to evaluate. So even the teams that have put themselves in a position to be near the top of the draft don't always end up there, but that's why the Jazz the last 2 years not being in position to get lucky in the lottery odds has hurt them most. And then the final 2 picks were Jalen Suggs and Isaac Okoro. That's one all-star, in my opinion. That's Osar Thompson, and that's still presumptuous and maybe high on the hype train. So these numbers demonstrate the vast disparity between picks, even between pick 1 and 2, and certainly the gap between 1 and 5. And it's difficult, but it's becoming easier to scout. That shows how important it is to put yourself in a position to succeed by being within the top 3 worst teams in the NBA. So this year's draft is perceived as very good because of Cooper Flagg, who's at the top, feels as sure of a thing as there is. But after him, there's certainly some premier talent, and there's ceilings for players like Dylan Harper, Ace Bailey, VJ Edgecombe, Kasparas Jakucionis, Trey Johnson, all of whom, if things go right, I think could be all-stars. But the odds are not fully in your favor, as seen by those odds I just told you about. And I'll discuss the non-Cooper Flagg guys next. Introduce you guys to some of them and talk about my concerns opposed to the simple reasons that they could, in fact, be all-stars, and why people are so high on them, as seen as most people's top 6. All that and more coming up next. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no place better than to get it than on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, like the one that the Jazz just had happen to them, you can stay in the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. By the way, I love betting on college hoops because I can't bet on the Jazz or the NBA because I work for them, and FanDuel is also the spot to do it there, so I couldn't recommend it more. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature for college because I can see the comebacks happening because I love watching the games, and I'm sure you guys feel the same way about the NBA games you watch. It keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is intuitive, easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, the new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to Locked on Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin. So you guys know me probably most for draft talk, and I'll give you insights there. You ask and you shall receive. And I'll give my opinions on the players not named Cooper Flagg, of whom I'm sure you guys have heard. Now, with the numbers from above supporting the notion of the lower pick, the more difficult it is to find the face of the franchise, I'm going to give you the pitch for why these players could be the faces of the franchise should they hit their ceiling, but then give you my confidence scale and thus give you some concerns, because there are concerns to be had. So I'll start with Dylan Harper. Dylan Harper is 6'6", and he's a guard at Rutgers, left-handed, averages 19 points, 5 assists, and 4 rebounds on 48% from the field, 33 from 3, 74% from the free throw line. So my confidence level. This is the guy, aside from Cooper Flagg, I think I'd be thrilled most to draft because he can be a face of the franchise with his combination of size, ability to touch the paint, and score for himself, as well as distribute, being a force offensively. I do believe he can be an all-NBA guy and more than just an all-star, which is what you're hoping for when you're trying to find someone that can lead you to the promised land, especially in a talented Western conference that features guys within our own division like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Anthony Edwards. He reminds me a lot of left-handed version of Cade Cunningham, who I think quietly is becoming a monster in Detroit, but that's a story for another time. So what are the question marks? The swing skill for him is certainly his jump shot, and how well he fully rounds out that facet of his game will determine how high his ceiling is, because much like De'Aaron Fox, even though they don't play the same, he's not got the pace of Fox, so don't mistake that. But the reason I compare him to Fox is because Fox can score and he can pass, but his shot still lags behind his ability to get to the rim and causes him from reaching a level that I think would make him an all-NBA guy and a guy that can be the face of the franchise instead of a guy who's been dealt. And honestly, someone that was dealt for not a crazy package of goods. So Harper has a low release and has actually made a lot of threes with good percentage against the best teams he's played. And he's been better than Ace Bailey, his teammate, who we're going to talk about next, when both play against the best competition. Harper scored 37 against Alabama, who might be the best team in the country, and 28 against Illinois, who statistically is very well regarded. And it was also against one of the next guys we're going to talk about in Kasparas Jakucionis. So that brings me to Ace Bailey. 6'10", 200 pounds, slender scorer, 19 points, 8 rebounds on 47% from the field, 38 from three. Strangely, only 70% from the free throw line, but boy, can he shoot. The ceiling's kind of scary because if he hits his 100th percentile outcome, he might reach a stratosphere that not even Cooper Flagg can fathom. Because today, the most desirable player in the NBA is a big wing with superior scoring acumen and ability. I've likened him to Tracy McGrady if that vision comes together as a jumbo wing who can score in many ways, punish smaller defenders, is too quick and too elusive for bigger guys to guard. He has that skill and the stuff that makes you salivate in terms of, wow, that was a ridiculous shot he just made, that all people that have the build he has, the slender scorers, likened to Kevin Durant, he's got it in spades, but it's not demonstrated as consistently as you'd hope it would be. And he's not able to control a game like some of these guys would and have been in this skinny scorer mold. His numbers and shooting splits are encouraging, but this scoring method lacks shake. Like, he doesn't move you with ball handling. He doesn't have the burst, and that does concern me. So players of his archetype are, of course, under the Kevin Durant wing, and they all get the same, oh, can he be KD? But it's Michael Porter Jr., Brandon Ingram, Brandon Miller. And the scary part is they have all combined those three guys who are very good basketball players, only one all-star between them, and that's Brandon Ingram, and he's since been moved and not very desirable, and he got very little back in return. That's scary. So those are very good players, but not superstars, and certainly not super-duper stars. Ace and his body have to greatly mature and become more athletic for me to have the true belief he can be the guy that can transform and be the face of my team's franchise, the Utah Jazz. I would pick him third, but I feel like there is a drop-off between 2 and 3 that is more steep than I previously believed entering this season, and certainly more steep than I think is being advertised. So next up is a trio of guys that I think are closely linked, but are considered to be a drop-off between Bailey and the next trio. So I did it based on the way Tankathon had him ranked. VJ Edgecombe, 6'5", 15 points per game, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, shoots 46 from the field, 39 from 3, 79 from the free throw line. The ceiling, I heard Fran Frischel on a broadcast liken him to Dwayne Wade. So I guess I'll list that as my ceiling, but I'll voice my skepticism because I hold Dwayne Wade in very, very high regard. He's one of my favorite players of all time, and he is a special, special talent. That said, VJ Edgecombe has transformed his season, so I'll need to reevaluate because he started terribly, and I was very critical. But he's since demonstrated what traits have made him so desirable that many had him in the top 5 discussion throughout the entire process. And it's athleticism, it's ability to score, and he showed that at a very high level, being the leading scorer for a Bahamian national team that featured Buddy Hield, DeAndre Ayton, and Eric Gordon. So even after a dreadful start, he still has a chance to be a top 5, and that means something. Impressively, he scored more and more efficiently in Big 12 play as opposed to beating up on some of the inferior competition he played early. The vision here is he's a slasher by nature with exceptional athleticism. He can jump. If you want a guy from this class to win a dunk contest, this is your guy. And his shooting is budding, and you hope it can be consistent down the road. And he's got creation that is based on attacking a closeout and going downhill. He can definitely rebound, and he can definitely defend. So a guy I think is a reasonable comp is maybe Victor Oladipo as a less extreme comp than Dwayne Wade. And I think that's kind of a best case scenario. I don't necessarily see the all NBA future. My questions for VJ, the 38% from three, 39% from three feels iffy, especially in the last 12 games where he's 44% from three and 88% from the line, but that does encourage me. And he's scoring about 18 per game in Big 12 play, which ups him to 15 per game after a seriously terrible beginning to the season. Usually dudes are dudes from the get-go, and that does concern me that he kind of had to fit in and ingratiate himself to evaluators like myself as opposed to demonstrating why he's a talent. Like his only highlight from the first 15 games of the season was dunking on Mark Few's walk-on son, who is 6 feet tall, in a game where they were losing by 30. That was the only time I witnessed him being on the court. He blended in. He was a chameleon, and not in a good way. Usually dudes are dudes, and you can tell who they are. So the other reason I was worried is I'm worried he's closer to 6'3" than 6'5" that he's listed in, and he's only a two guard. I don't see on-ball creation that enables him to be a facilitator, and I think he's more adept at attacking closeouts than creating for himself. I think he would be achieving very well to emulate the career of Oladipo, subtracting the injuries. I'm not seeing a Donovan Mitchell scoring ability there, to put a Jazz comparison for those of you who are Jazz-oriented. And even then, Donovan Mitchell's spectacular. He's a great player. And I don't see that future for VJ Edgecombe. And even Donovan wasn't able to get the Jazz out of the second round. Next, we go to Kasparas Jakucionis. He's a little bit different than some of these guys. 6'6", true point guard. 205 pounds, 16 points per game, 6 boards, 5 assists, 48% from the field, 35% from three, 83 from the line. Ceiling, maybe best case scenario, he's an all-star because he'll have the ball in his hands in a heliocentric way compared to what Luka Doncic does. And he scores off step backs and guile, and it resembles Luka of the college game. That's the easiest way to put it. But I don't see superstar, but I do see a good player. I actually spoke with a scout recently, and he said he sees the third or fourth best player on a good team for Kasparas Jakucionis. But if you're drafting him fifth, like I've got him ranked here, you want second best at worst. And that's the scary thing about drafting fifth, because we already talked about the Pistons did it 3 times, and I think they're 1 for 3 and 1 for 3 of drafting a guy who can reach an all-star, much less a guy who can transform your franchise and be the face of the franchise. It's a little bit scary. The concerns for him, bad defender, relying on tough shots. That said, he can really make them. He's got a beautiful step back and a great jump shot. Speaking of a great jump shot, that brings me to the final guy I'm telling you guys about, Trey Johnson from Texas. 6'6", 185 pounds, 19 points per game in the vaunted SEC, 3 assists, 3 rebounds, 44% from the field, 39 from 3, 87 from the line. He is a professional scorer, a professional bucket getter. I can see an all-star with him more easily than I can for VJ and Jakucionis, because he can really score and he can do it in bunches, and he does it against the best of the best as a true freshman in the SEC. The SEC is unbelievable this year, and he should be first team all-conference, and he can do it in a lot of ways. He can score as a shooter. He should be more willing to get off the rock when he has more capable shooters surrounding him, and potentially and especially likely better spacing at the NBA level. That said, I asked the same scout about him, and he said, is he Jordan Clarkson, or is he a scaled up version of Jordan Clarkson, scoring type? But how many teams will let him do what he does and take the shot diet he does at Texas? And, you know, that's his job at Texas. That's what his job should be in the NBA, is to be a scorer. But how many true just bucket getters, not necessarily a great defender, not a great passer, are there in the NBA that you're saying, man, I think he's the best player on the team? There's not many. So that's the concern. He takes really hard shots in college, and I wonder if he'll do the same against better athletes and more seriously intense defense that has better scouting reports. And, you know, where does he fall in line if he's not the best player? Does he knock down open shots, or does he need the ball in his hands? In sum, the draft has a lot of very good players this year. A lot of them. But are we sure, absolutely sure, that there is a star to turn the franchise around beyond a first couple picks? No. And that's not the way people are going to tell you this narrative, but I'm here to give you the serious truth about what the Jazz are facing and hoping to thread the needle and find that franchise-altering talent. These are the 5 after Cooper Flagg, and there's only one I truly, and I could be wrong, very easily could be, there's only one I truly believe in with trust to be the guy for the Jazz, and that's Dylan Harper. I can convince myself into others in some capacity, but I'm telling you with transparency, the draft in general is a crapshoot, and this draft is no different. This year, though good, has few guarantees, and the Jazz have actually chosen a direction this year, which is good, but they got to hit on this pick because the other years have landed us 9 and 10. This direction has been chosen, but there aren't clear-cut picks at a certain level. Once you hit past 1, 2, 3, who knows what to do, and you could get lucky. You could pick wisely, but it's not necessarily a guarantee. So there aren't clear-cut saviors to be picked outside of 1 and 2, and the rest is a leap of faith. So the Jazz must commit to the future starting now and give the Jazz the best chance to land a pick within the top 3. Thank you guys for listening, and I'll be back next week with more Jazz talk, more draft talk, rookie evaluations, and much, much more, talking about the players currently on the Utah Jazz, and maybe talk about the All-Star a little bit too. Thanks for making Locked On Jazz your very first listen. And with your next, please check out Locked On NBA Big Board to hear more about these prospects that could be in Utah Jazz uniforms for years to come. Also, your favorite podcast now has a newsletter introducing the Locked On Jazz daily newsletter, one stop for the ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com. That's lockedondaily.com, and start your day with all new free Locked On Jazz newsletter. Thank you guys, and I'll talk to you guys next week. It's always a pleasure.